Deconstructing the Newsroom video clip was a short essay posted at GuyMcPherson.com on July 3, 2015. In this essay, I provided my assessment of a short clip from the HBO series The Newsroom. The episode first ran November 23, 2014, about 7 years and 4 months ago. The episode was titled Main Justice. Paul Lieberstein played the scientist responding to the questions from Jeff Daniels, who played the news anchor. The clip I'm using here first appeared on the Classical and New Age 1 YouTube channel shortly after the show aired in November 2014. Sorry for the abrupt start. From here forward, I will provide commentary only via text written over the original video provided by Classical and New Age 1. Remember, the clip initially appeared in November 2014, and my initial response via blog post at GuyMcPherson.com came about 7.5 months later. When asked how they could see the future, science fiction writers George Orwell, Ray Bradbury, and Aldous Huxley each gave the same answer. Rather than predicting the future, they were reporting on events currently underway. I can relate.
Show a little video clip that appeared on an HBO program called The Newsroom, written by Aaron Sorkin.
And joining us now in studio is Richard Westbrook, Deputy Assistant Administrator of the EPA. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Westbrook, you've spent most of your professional career as a climate scientist in the public sector.
Yes, 10 years as a supervisory management analyst in the Office of Environmental Information. And before that, I was a program specialist in the EPA's Resource Management Division.
And you have a PhD in climate science from Stanford.
Yes, and another in chemistry with a master's in biology.
Okay. Tell us about the findings in the report that was just released.
The latest measurements taken at Mauna Loa in Hawaii indicate a CO2 level of 400 parts per million.
Just so we know what we're talking about, if you were a doctor and we were the patient, what's your prognosis? 1,000 years, 2,000 years?
A person has already been born who will die due to catastrophic failure of the planet.
What did he just say?
Okay, can you expand on that?
Sure. The last time there was this much CO2 in the air, the oceans were 80 feet higher than they are now. Two things you should know. Half the world's population lives within 120 miles of an ocean.
And the other?
Humans can't breathe underwater.
You're saying the situation's dire.
Not exactly. Your house is burning to the ground, the situation's dire. Your house has already burned to the ground. Situation's over.
So what can we do to reverse this?
Well, there's a lot we could do.
Good.
For 20 years ago or even 10 years ago, but now, no.
Can you make an analogy that might help us understand?
Sure. It's as if you're sitting in your car, in your garage, with the engine running and the door closed, and you've slipped into unconsciousness, and that's it.
What if someone comes and opens the door?
You're already dead.
What if the person got there in time?
You'd be saved.
Okay. So now what's the CO2 equivalent of the getting there on time?
Shutting off the car 20 years ago.
You sound like you're saying it's hopeless.
Yeah.
Is that the administration's position or yours?
There isn't a position on this any more than there's a position on the temperature at which water boils.
The administration, your administration.
And don't forget, I need you to
supports wind and
stretch
solar,
40.
clean coal, nuclear power, raising fuel economy standards, and building a more efficient electrical grid.
Yes.
And?
That would have been great.
Let's see if we can't find a better spin. People are starting their weekends. The report says we can release 565 more gigatons of CO2 without the effects being
It
calamitous.
says we can only release 565 gigatons.
So what if we only release 564?
Well, then we would have a reasonable shot at some form of dystopian post-apocalyptic life. But the carbon dioxide in the oil that we've already leased is 2,795 gigatons. So,
What would all this look like?
well, mass migrations, food and water shortages, spread of deadly disease, endless wildfires, way too many to keep under control. Storms that have the power to level cities, blacken out the sky, and create permanent darkness.
Are you going to get in trouble for saying this publicly?
Who cares?
Mr. Westbrook, we want to inform people, but we don't want to alarm them. Can you give us a reason to be optimistic?
Well, that's the thing, Will. Americans are optimistic by nature. And if we face this problem head on, if we listen to our best scientists and act decisively and passionately, I still don't see any way we can survive.
Okay. Richard Westbrook, Deputy Assistant Administrator of the EPA. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
This is Newsnight. We'll be back right after this.
I want to walk through some of the things the character said. He mentioned 80-foot sea level rise, which is 20-meter sea level rise, as being already locked in. But he failed to mention that at actually 385 parts per million, he was pointing out we were at 400, we're now at 409 parts per million. At 385 parts per million, there's 23-meter sea level rise locked in, and also a 6C global average temperature rise locked in. The heating associated with carbon dioxide currently in the atmosphere will persist for at least 1,000 years, according to a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, February 2012. We've known this for a long time. The official also talked about mass migrations. What he meant was a refugee crisis. Migration, as any biologist knows, is a two-way street. We have migratory birds. That means they move south in the winter and move north in the summer. They migrate. They're not refugees. What we're seeing right now is a refugee crisis, the likes of which the world has never seen. Why are people leaving the Middle East and Northern Africa? Why are people leaving Pacific Island states? Because there's no habitat for humans there anymore. It's simple. When you view it from a biological perspective, it's absolutely simple. Climate exodus is expected, really expected, in the Middle East and Northern Africa. I was in Europe about a year ago on a speaking tour, and everywhere I went in Western Europe, people were complaining, Donald Trump style, about the Middle Easterners and Northern Africans fleeing into their countries. And they wanted to keep them out. It's underway. The mainstream media is catching on, finally, this week and last week, when U.S. Secretary of the Interior Sally Jewell said, we will have climate refugees. Well, of course she said that, because we already do. And finally, the government is admitting as much, just like the mainstream media is admitting as much, that these things are already underway. The character talked about food and water shortages. Again, they're underway. Syria, people are not leaving Syria because they're looking for a vacation. People are leaving Syria because the food they've relied upon for thousands of years of human society in Syria is gone. And it ain't coming back. Water shortages, we're running out of water. The spread of deadly disease has been underway for a while with things like Lyme and malaria and dengue and now Zika. And finally, it might actually make people notice in the United States, because we have the first American that dies of complications due to Zika. Oh, none of that mattered when it was brown people, now did it? But now it's Americans who are actually dying from the spread of deadly diseases as a result of climate change. I was teaching this very topic in my classes 15, 20 years ago as something that would be on the way. The mainstream media are still telling you that it's on the way. It's not on the way. It's here. Again, endless wildfires, way too many to control. How about this headline from today, in which Fort McMurray, ironically, right in the heart of the tar sands in Edmonton, has been evacuated. At noon, when I checked today, it was just over half of the 61,000 people in the city who had been evacuated. Since then, it's many, many more. We can't get an exact count, but it's somewhere between half and all of the people in Fort McMurray are leaving because of Arctic wildfires in early May. Last year, the United States experienced more acres burned than ever in history. And you saw what the graph looks like for temperature in 2016 as opposed to 2015. Storms that have the power to level cities and create permanent darkness, well, it hasn't been permanent yet, but Katrina more than 10 years ago was kind of a big deal. And then Sandy, not much later, and then in rapid succession, one each year, Haiyan, Winston, and Patricia, are these enormous record-setting storms. The biggest one ever in the fill-in-the-blank, right, the Pacific Ocean. Now that La Nina is back, we could, or appears to be back, we could have similar storms occurring in the Atlantic, where they've been largely absent for the last couple of years.